Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this morning's talk, where hopefully we'll be able to give you some insight into a piece of music you're about to hear 16 times. We're delighted to have this competition underway. I think it's always a sense of excitement before it begins. It's a bit like giving birth to a child every time this happens, and I've been involved with 9 of them. It must feel something like that for a composer as they create a piece of music. It's a bit like another child in the family.
Well, I've never given birth, but...
No, we'll more on that later. So we're very delighted to have one of New Zealand's most eminent composers, Lyell Cresswell, associated with the competition this time. The fact that we have a modern New Zealand piece in the competition is very important for a number of reasons. First of all, it helps the cultural life of New Zealand and encourages composers to write a piece of music, another piece of music, but also it challenges the competitors to playing works of our time and with modern techniques and so on, and we'll hopefully go into that in a little bit more detail through the talk this morning. But first of all, let's welcome Lyell Cresswell, please. He is in a line of great New Zealand composers that have been associated with the competition. We've had Jack Boddy and Gareth Farr and John Suthis, to name 3. But of course we've had 10 altogether, including this one. So without further ado, Lyell, perhaps you'd tell the audience a bit about your background and history and your story up to this point.
Okay, well, if you want a blow-by-blow account, I was born on Friday the 13th in a brass band some years ago.
No mic? No mic.
Oh, shall I say it again? Oh, well, to give you a blow-by-blow account of my life, I was born on Friday the 13th. I was born on Friday. Is that better? Yes, okay. I was born on Friday the 13th. No, I can hear myself now. I was born on Friday the 13th in a brass band some years ago, 1944 to be precise, in October. I was born into a Salvation Army family. My 4 uncles on both sides of the family played in the brass band. One of them wrote music for the brass band, and so I was immersed in that world from the moment, more or less, that I left the hospital or whatever. And even when I was in my mother's womb, I would hear her contralto voice humming various hymn tunes and things from time to time. So I'm steeped in that kind of world from the beginning. That was my formative musical experience, I suppose. I was born in Wellington. Then in later life, not much later, I went to secondary school. Secondary school was so boring that I immersed myself in music and moved broader than the world of Salvation Army band music, and discovered all kinds of interesting things in the world of classical music. And from there I went to university, studied in Wellington with Douglas Lilburn, David Farquhar, Jenny MacLeod, Fred Page. I think I had a very good musical education. I think that's where my whole education began, really. I think those people who say that school days were the best days of their life must have had very boring lives after that. And from there I had a scholarship to Toronto to study composition and electronic music and various other things. Then I came back and worked as a postman in Dunedin for a while, and then went studying in various places, Aberdeen, Utrecht, and even a computer music course at MIT for a little while. I've since lost the faith in computer music. I know it's very important in this world, but I like working with people rather than computers more. And from there, well, things just grew.
And you're living in Edinburgh now?
Yes, I live in Edinburgh now. I arrived in Edinburgh. I arrived in 1980 to take up a position of resident composer at Edinburgh University. I was there for 2 years. Then I had a resident composership in Glasgow University, so we stayed in Edinburgh. And that was after 5 years, and we're still there.
Is your microphone working yet?
I don't know. Is my microphone working?
No. Okay. Well, we'll just keep handing this back and forward unless they can fix it in the meantime. Well, going on to your music, tell us a little bit about your musical style and your musical influences. You've already alluded to the brass band upbringing and the Salvation Army and so on. Does that come out in your music in any way?
Well, I think it must, but there's no obvious way. I don't think in which it comes out. I mean, all these formative experiences are clearly there. I can't deny that there's an influence somewhere. I've written quite a lot of orchestral music, and I like quite colourful orchestral music. So there's probably something in it from that. Otherwise, the influences, I don't know it's hard to say because there are so many influences. When I was a student, we did lots of 12-note music, which was a good discipline in the style of Webern, perhaps, or whoever. And it was a very good discipline. But again, it wasn't quite my cup of tea. My influences at that stage are probably more like Stravinsky, Bartók, that kind of thing. And then on to people like Lutosławski and Ligeti and Berlioz and Arcus. These are probably the composers that I respect most. All dead now, of course.
Do you find you have an early, middle, and late period in your compositions, a la Beethoven?
I think I'm still in my early period. I think I probably almost learned how to write music. I think it'll probably take about another 30 years before I actually get there. That will be my middle period.
Well, Michael Hill says you must have a 30-year plan in your life at any stage. So that's a good idea. So you have a brass background. Did you play a brass instrument, or one more than the other? And are you a string player in any way, or what is your background in string writing?
No, I'm a brass player. I played various brass instruments. The trumpet was being the one I played most. I have handled cellos and violins in my time and tried to make something of it, but I'm not a string player, no, nor am I a contrabassoon player. I think the position of the composer, it's like what Keats, I think, calls negative capability. For writers, a novelist has to put himself in the position of all kinds of people who have nothing to do with his or her own background. It's the same. I put myself in the position of all the instruments of the orchestra. I listen, I talk to players. I think I know quite well the capabilities of all the instruments. And so I don't think I need to actually play the contrabassoon or the contrabass clarinet.
As any composer should before they tackle a piece. Well, we should move on to this piece before we run out of time. But tell me about it. Why did you write this particular work? And tell us a little bit about the work itself.
Well, the first thing when one is commissioned is to find some angle, some basis, some story to base the piece on, as well as the things that you know. Like I knew it was to be a 5-minute piece, and I knew it was for solo violin, so there already is a starting point. And because of the jewellery connection, I thought, well, why not have a title that reflects this. So the title Chatoyance is the French for l'œil du chat, which is the cat's eye, the idea of a light shining from the eye, and when you move around you see it reflected in different ways. I think one way to listen to this piece might be to imagine that you're in a room with a piece of jewellery, Michael Hill jewellery that is, perhaps hanging from the ceiling or on a table, nothing else in the room, and light coming in through the windows, shifting light coming in. And you spend just 5 minutes, just those 5 minutes, walking around, admiring the light, the different reflections. Sometimes it'll be scintillating, sometimes it'll be calm, sometimes it'll be dramatic, sometimes nothing much will happen, and you just imagine walking around and seeing all these, and taking in all these different aspects of the light as you hear the piece.
So in musical terms, I noticed that there are little musical fragments which come back in different ways, and is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yes. Another thing, starting point, was that there's I've noticed in the pieces that we've heard, there's very little pizzicato apart from a few flashy effects. There have been some other, and so I decided that this piece would have quite a lot of pizzicato to show what the players can do with pizzicato. The piece begins with 3 A's and a slight pause and a B. These 4 notes are crucial. These are what the piece is all about. These notes are these are like the jewel itself, which is always there, but is reflected in very different ways. The pizzicato grows; it becomes embellished. It becomes, and then for a while, it becomes very calm when the player starts to use the bow, and the bow move up the whole tone from A to B or whatever it is transposed, and these long notes are embellished, and gradually the embellishments take over just as the pizzicato develops, all within mind of the opening notes, and they become more and more dramatic. There's a dramatic section in the middle where anything goes. It's more about the embellishments leading back to the original 4 notes.
One of my duties as artistic advisor to this competition is to vet the piece when it arrives. So some months ago, Lyell sent me the music for this, and I played it through to make sure things were playable and so on. And it was with some alarm, I must admit, at first that I saw all this pizzicato. Pizzicato is one of those techniques that we often neglect as violin players. I think you don't practice pizzicato very often, and it's really driven by the piece you're playing at the time. But there is quite an art to playing pizzicato, and as I've gone through my career, I use different fingers for different sounds, and people don't normally think about this. And of course, very fast pizzicato is quite difficult as well, and so we'll see some of that. It's not often that I get a chance to collaborate with the composer as he writes the piece of music, and so I took the daring liberty of making a few suggestions to Lyell, and I'm saying, well, these competitors, they're all very fine virtuosi, and I think you should make this a bit more difficult here, or do you really need all those harmonics there, or something like that? Just a little tweaks, I suppose. Could you talk about how that changed from the first to the second draft, or anything?
Yes, the first draft is, I think, as Dean says, was a little easier, perhaps considerably easier than the first. But I relished the chance to make it more difficult. Normally, people ask me to make things easier, not more difficult. And I think, and we arrived, I was very pleased to this kind of collaboration is what we want. Because normally when one writes a piece for a soloist, we have a collaboration with the player. You show the player what you're writing, and you have some dialogue. In this case, I have had no dialogue with the players at all in the writing of the piece. I had a quick word with one player who told me which finger he would use for the pizzicato, but otherwise, I have had no, especially at the time of writing, no dialogue. So in a way, this was the position that Dean filled as the player I would have collaborated with. Say I'm writing a concerto, I always collaborate with the soloist, and this was the role that Dean fulfilled. And I was very pleased because the piece is much stronger, I think. If more difficult, it's much stronger than the original version, the original draft, I should say, that I sent.
I don't often dare to tell a composer what to write, but I'm glad that you're happier with the final result. One of the judges was asking me about the piece, and it's such a difficult task to sit on the panel there and judge all these fine young players and to try and separate one from the other. One thing I'm very concerned about when we get a new piece like this is how to judge it. And we've had some in the past which have been very difficult to judge for various reasons. But what do you think the judges should listen for? And for that matter, what should the audience listen for to separate the competitors' interpretations? But the judges especially would like to know what especially to listen for. And by the way, if anybody in the audience has any questions, we might have a chance for one or two. So think about that as Lyell responds to that question.
Well, I can't really help you with that one. I was scared at first that I might be asked to be involved in the judging. I'm so relieved that I'm not. far be it from me to tell the judges what to listen for and how to judge it. I'm afraid I have been listening to the first round, and I think I've probably been listening from a different perspective as everybody else, because one of the concerns I've had is how I think each competitor is going to play my piece. And I have formed various opinions about that, but I would never pass these on to anybody, let alone the judges.
Well, I'm sure they'll do their utmost to try and decide who does the best piece. But it would be interesting to hear your opinion afterwards. Now, it's not often you get a chance to hear your piece 16 times, especially in the space of 36 hours or something. How will that affect you?
It's a bit excessive. I mean, this is a completely new experience for me. Usually you have a piece played a few times, not 16 times in 2 days. This is it's only 5 minutes though, so I suppose, that makes it sort of a substantial piece heard twice, I suppose. You think of it like that. But I'm very curious to see how it will develop and how the different players will interpret it. It's extraordinary. I've written a score very precisely, very clear. Everything is written very clearly, but I know that it will come out in always in valid interpretations. It will come out very differently each time, and that's what I'm finding exciting.
I've often had the experience with composers, you ask them for a 15-minute piece and it ends up to be 30 minutes. It's very hard to get composers to stick to a strict time limit. Was that a challenge at all when we have a very strict time limit of 5 minutes here?
Well, yes, it was a challenge, but I was left in no doubt by the organisers that it should be a 5-minute piece, and it mustn't exceed 5 minutes. It mustn't, not by even 1 second. So I've written a piece of about 4 minutes, 57 seconds in theory. However, I suspect, as usual, performances nearly always take a little bit longer than the time one imagines, the live thing. So I suspect we will go over the 5 minutes in just about every case.
Well, we'll have to leave it soon, but it must be a thrill to come back to New Zealand often. And how does that affect you coming home?
Oh, I love coming back. We come back quite often. This is the last time. It's about 18 months ago. We come back whenever there's a chance, especially when there's some excuse like this to come back, and sometimes with a little bit of help to come back. Yes, and we will be back again within the year, courtesy of Emirates, who bumped us off a flight, and the compensation was another free ticket. So we'll be back within the year.
Well, if there are any questions from the audience, we might have a minute or two just to spend. If I can't really see very well out there. Is there any questions from anyone? Yes, lady here.
It's like the country question, how long did it take you to write?
The question is, how long did it take you to write?
Well, this is a good question, because from beginning to end, I first heard about the commission about 2 years. It must have been just after the last competition that I was asked. So I had a little bit of time. Of course, I had a lot of other work to do at the time, and then I wrote a version of it. Then I had other work to do, and I came back to it. And then I wrote the version which I sent to Dean, and then this was probably about October, or was it that? When did you get it? End of last year. I think that was the deadline. Anyway, whatever. I sent it to Dean, and then I spent quite a bit of time relishing the task of making it more difficult. So it's difficult to say really how long. It was probably over about a year, but I was working on other things at the same time. This often happens if I have a smallish commission and a larger commission. Sometimes the smaller commission gets fitted in between various things in the larger commission. So I would say it was written over a year, more or less, but not always working on the piece, of course.
Are there any other questions? I'm sorry, I can't see. Yes.
Did you say that there's a section in which the players are supposed to improvise? I'm not sure if I understood correctly.
The question is there a section where they're supposed to improvise?
No, No, it's written. It's all written very precisely.
And maybe one or two more if we have any other questions. No, I don't think so. Anyway, we're all going to know this piece very well after 16 renditions of it by tomorrow night. So, Lyell Cresswell, we're delighted to have you associated with the Michael Hill International Violin Competition. I hope everyone enjoys the piece as much as I've enjoyed being part of the process. And thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your piece in advance.
Thank you very much.